think Osayaba doesn't need any further introduction, but I'd like to introduce our special guest, Dianna Games, who's the CEO of Africa at Work, and also the Executive Director of the South African Nigeria Chamber of Commerce. And it's actually very appropriate to have both of them here because Osayaba is heavily involved in the South African Nigerian Chamber of Commerce in Lagos. So I think we can really brainstorm a bit about that. Thank you both for coming. I think I'd like to start. There's been a very interesting recent book by Adekeye Adebayo called The Eagle and the Springbok, which is a Nigerian eagle and South African springbok, obviously. I mean, the state of South African-Nigerian relations has been affected by a bit of a ragged relationship with the MTN fine, for example, other South African companies in Nigeria being fined, the mass deportation of 200 Nigerians from ORT Tambo Airport because of the not having yellow fever certificates. And since you're both intimately involved in the relationships between the two countries, I'd really welcome your views as to where we are at the moment and where we are going forward.
Yes, I think Nigeria, being the largest economy in Africa, a position we continually alternate with South Africa, our brothers, that has its own problems, because there's a certain degree of competition. And from the time we were young, we were all encouraged to aim for the best or the first position. So I think that's an issue that the two countries face on a regular basis. The second one is the level of interaction between the presidents of both countries. Under Obasanjo, we had a very good relationship. Our presidents would call each other regularly. When we wanted to set up a national airline, the Nigerian government was not happy with the Virgin Group. The president just called your president and said, look, we'd like South African Airways to do this without any form of bidding. Come and let us do that. So if the presidents are close, it sends a very good, a strong message down to the other members, of the society, to say that that relationship is important. Historically, we've worked together, but I think what we need to do is for the members, people occupying strategic positions in both countries to take their time to understand the peculiar natures, the issues of the other country before taking major decisions. It's very critical. It will not be wise for a Nigerian to come to South Africa and believe that the way we do certain things in Nigeria, that's the same way it will be done in South Africa or expect it to be done in South Africa. The South Africans too, when you come to Nigeria, look for dependable partners. Let them lead you, advise you on what steps to take. Because our laws are different. The political structure, very different. The social setting also different. So although we are both on the same continent, we are friends, we need to take time to understand ourselves very well. And if we're able to do that, you will find out that the occasional tension between both countries, would reduce, to a very, in a major way. Some of the issues we have had in the past, and I would like to say this at this forum, is that there are times when foreigners come to Nigeria. Let me give you a classic example. We advise a good number of new companies coming to Nigeria. And we had a conference call discussing with a company in Europe that wanted to come to Nigeria. And I listed out all the laws, the regulations they needed to comply with. Expatriate quota, certificate of capital, importation. We listed everything. The lady at the other end of the phone said, but I thought Nigeria was lawless. She said, look, from what I've been told about Nigeria, you don't need to comply with all these laws. Just come in there. If you are not happy with what is going on, see somebody to bribe. I said, no. You understand? I said, no. The people who would want to bribe anyone, that cannot be more than 5%. That's the truth of the matter. We are talking about bribe, doing things in a disorderly way, just about 5%. So when you are coming to a country like Nigeria, know very well that you need to speak to your lawyers, you need to speak to your auditors or your accountants so that they would advise you on the things you need to do. The approvals you need, if you get all those things, if they are in order, you don't have any problem whatsoever. But if you come in, if you are supposed to have 15 approvals, you only have 10. On a Friday night, Friday evening, somebody may just come knocking on your door, asking for some of these approvals. Thank you.
I think what Osayaba said is right. Nigeria is actually quite a highly regulated economy, and I think Etienne learned that to their cost. I think there are different ways of looking at that. You could argue that the prior administration was more lax in applying some of those regulations. But I think, and when the new administration came into power under President Buhari, that changed, and the company wasn't keeping up. I mean, that's one of the views I have about that. And I think really it had a lot of multinational companies around Africa scrambling to check their regulatory position and compliance. And I think the point is exactly right, is that you can't assume, and I think that there's a tendency to believe that Nigeria, exactly what that woman said, it's not an uncommon view that Nigeria is quite lawless, it's corrupt. So if there's easy ways to do things, you don't have to go the hard yards. And that actually isn't true, because the compliance issues, it's patchy. I think I'd say maybe less like South Africa. Compliance is quite it's kind of patchy in a way. So you can get people knocking on your door in the middle of the night asking for the 15 certificates, but you could also pay your way out of maybe 5 of them. But you don't want to do that. I mean, that's certainly not recommended. And it's just that there is an issue about the perception about Nigeria and how things work there. And it's not just a perception. There are a lot of people do things the way they shouldn't do them, but it certainly isn't recommended. And the problem with that is if you get caught, I mean, the reputational damage to MTN has been absolutely horrific. And also what it did in Nigeria, it really reset this idea of MTN being MTN is the sort of brand leader of South Africa and Nigeria. So everything that MTN does is kind of a benchmark or a yardstick of, in some way, of our corporate engagement with that country. So with MTN behaving, in a way that was perhaps a bit lax, it had a knock-on effect into this relationship, or perceptions by Nigerians of this relationship. And as you know, whenever there is an attack on foreigners in South Africa, or there's some kind of kickback, it is actually MTN that is first in line for the reciprocity kind of thing on the other side. So on the whole, this relationship works really well, and I think at the lower levels, I think unfortunately a lot of it is judged by the crisis, the odd crisis. Whether it be people being turned back on a yellow fever issue, or attacks on foreigners, or whatever it is. What happens though, whenever there is this kind of a crisis emerges, or some kind of problem emerges in the relationship, everybody goes back to the same positions. South Africans are arrogant, Nigerians are this. We all kind of, the positions get back to the past. And I think what it really says is we're not really moving this relationship forward. We are stuck in, everyone can reel off the 10 things, the 10 problems we've had, and say, this describes a relationship, or the fact that the presidents don't speak. But actually the presidents have become a little bit immaterial. Not that they should be, but they have become a bit immaterial in this relationship, because, for example, there's a business delegation from Osayaba's chamber in Nigeria this morning. Our chamber hosted a big investment forum at Gibbs this morning. So there's a lot of business taking place. There's 120 odd people there. So things are happening. I think we mustn't judge a lot of the African things by the leaders. But governance and leadership is extremely poor in Africa, and it continues to be so. So I think we've got to look at it in a much more nuanced way.
That's quite interesting. So private sector is pushing the relationship forwards more than the government. So, I mean, the new president of South Africa, I think maybe that will go back to the days of Osagie and Beki, hopefully. But I think it's quite interesting to hear about the Nigerian business delegation. I mean, in South Africa, the media focus a lot on South African investment in Nigeria. But you see, hear very little about Nigerian investment in South Africa. And Nigerian businesses and banks have been very active in other African countries as well. I think it's one of the most important local African investors. Because I think one of the challenges in Africa remains the low intra-African trade between African countries and investment between African countries. And South Africa and Nigeria are really the drivers when you look at Africa. I suppose you could add Egypt maybe as a third place. But I'd be interested to know about Nigerian business investment into South Africa.
As you mentioned, at the last count we had about 120 South African companies operating in Nigeria, and the number is growing by the day because we have huge opportunities in Nigeria. But in terms of Nigerian companies operating in South Africa, the number is not as high. But we have a good number of Nigerian professionals working in South Africa. Nigerian doctors, Nigerian architects, a good number of Nigerians that were working in the States, in Europe and other countries, who have seen South Africa, a first stop or a last stop before coming to Nigeria, because although they were not satisfied with working in Europe or America, they felt before coming to Nigeria, let's come to another country that is quite similar, that has very high standards like in Europe. But we also have we have our artists. We have very many artists, musicians, people working in South Africa. But the main difference we have at the moment is that we don't have the big companies, the likes of MTN, Sasol from Nigeria coming to South Africa. We have a friend, I say a friend, I'm sure Dianna's friend, Osagie, Dangote. He has this cement, company in South Africa, and a good number of Nigerian banks have representative offices in South Africa. But some have informed me that the process of getting a full banking license here is very difficult. They would like to have full banking licenses in South Africa. It's very difficult. Then the other problem they have is that the level of development in your economy is very high. So if you want to come in any of the major industries, you are coming in at a very high level. So for it to be profitable, if you are coming at a high level, you have to do your own work very well. But if you drop one step below, we have Nigerian companies in South Africa into construction and other different areas. But I'm sure Dianna would have better statistics on that.
Well, I think it's safe to say that one of the main exports from Nigeria to South Africa, besides oil, and we do source a lot of our oil from Nigeria, is professional skills. A lot of, as he says, South Africa provided a soft landing for a lot of people coming back from diaspora. Some of them have stayed. On our chamber board, we have five Nigerian professionals who work for most of, Standard Bank, PwC, and companies like that. So South Africa has really gained quite a lot from that. But actually at some point in Nigeria, a lot of people went back to Nigeria, particularly the bankers. You'll find that most of the a lot of the African diaspora in South Africa is in the financial services industry and come from Citi. People know each other from that sort of network of all these international banks. But he's right. I mean, Dangote is the only company of size. It's a big issue with the politicians. They keep saying, can we not have more Nigerians investing in South Africa? But I think there's a number of answers to that. One of it, which is the reason that so many big listed and even small companies from South Africa are in Nigeria is because that's where all the low-hanging fruit is. That is where the good returns are. Why would you want to come to South Africa to balance the books, as it were? Where it's much harder to do business, the competition is much higher, the returns are probably lower. So really, Nigerians, they own that market. So why would they want to rush to South Africa just to, because? And I think what you are seeing, most of the expansion of Nigerian companies outside Nigeria are banks, mostly into West Africa, a little bit into East Africa. They have quite a lot of oil experience in the oil industry, so they're moving into these new oil areas, Mozambique, East Africa, etc. In South Africa itself, a lot of Nigerian companies at a very much an SME sort of level. So, and there's a lot of wealthy Nigerians who own property here. There are a lot of academics and things like that. There's quite a strong penetration of Nigerians. It's just what we don't really have, and I think it would be important. Dangote doesn't really count. He operates here under Sipaku Cement. So there's a joint venture which he now owns, I think, outright. So the Dangote name is not visible in South Africa anyway, but there are no other companies of size, and I think that would help to somehow improve this relationship. I think the problem is, do big companies in Nigeria see the opportunity here yet? They have the whole of ECOWAS in their backyard, also a really low-hanging fruit, huge opportunity. Why come to South Africa? I mean, I think it's a question everyone assumes you should be in South Africa. I'm not sure that's the case, and in fact the Nigerian banks, I hear a different story. There were 3 representative bank offices here. First Bank, the 3 big banks, Zenith and First Bank of Nigeria, they've all closed those offices. And it wasn't because, as I hear it, of them not being able to get business licenses for commercial banking. I think that I certainly heard from First Bank of Nigeria, this issue was raised by the politicians, so I looked into it, is that they don't see the business case here for that. The diaspora population is not big enough, it's not wealthy enough for them. The corporate relationship is there, but actually what they want is they want ShopRite and others to have banks accounts with the Nigerian banks. So the rep offices are serving that kind of purpose. And so I think there's a lot of information that's not accurate that floats around this relationship. I'm not saying that they haven't tried. I haven't spoken to all the banks, but so I think the misinformation is one of the issues in this relationship just generally.
Regarding the First Bank issue, we were instructed initially to advise them on closing their representative office, and 2 of the directors were my personal friends, and they expressed the opinion that some of them would have wanted to obtain licenses, but it was almost impossible. And you also have this issue of exchange control restrictions in South Africa. A good number of Nigerians who have bought properties here, anytime they want to sell their properties, they always say they have problems with the Reserve Bank. I'm not sure whether the means by which they brought the property to the country is the issue, or the regulations are very, very tight in South Africa. In Nigeria, if you are conducting a bona fide type of business, you bring in your money through an authorized dealer, which is a bank, and you obtain your certificate of capital importation. Anytime you want to leave the country, 24/7, you are allowed to take your money out. Yes, you don't need anybody at all. The critical thing is obtain your certificate of capital importation, which your banker and your lawyer can assist you. Once you have that, anytime you want to repatriate your dividends, you want to close your company and send the proceeds out of the country, you are free. The only other thing is that there are certain areas, maybe in the technology area, and there are some specific agreements you know, for training or manpower, there are some certain sectors, you know, that you need approval for one of the regulatory bodies. Once you get the approval, it means you can repatriate your money at the central bank rate. Thank you.
Well, I just wanted to say that Nigeria, as Osayaba said earlier, has just come out of a recession, and one of the biggest headaches actually for, although all of what he's just said is obviously accurate and on the books, one of the biggest headaches for companies, and I mentioned, for example, MTN, NAMPAC, I'm talking about the big corporates, couldn't get their money out, they couldn't get dividends out, they couldn't repatriate profits for a better part of a year, and of course all the while the Naira was depreciating. So you know, their profits were still growing, and I think, you know, companies like NAMPAC and MTN have had a brilliant ride in Nigeria. And but the point is the money was stuck there, and I think it's loosened up in the last couple of months. But I think that forex issue is one of the big risks that companies face across the continent, and it's not. It certainly will. Zimbabwe is as always a completely different story. But we'll talk about that later.
If I just to add to what my friend has said, the issue of not having forex for about 1 year was because the currency was devalued. The exchange rate was about it was about 165. It moved up to about the current rate of 360. From 165 to about 360. Some of the companies wanted to repatriate their funds using the central bank rate, which was, that's 165, at a time when everybody else was getting dollars at 360. So they had to wait for some time for the central bank to have enough money. So there was a form of rationing which occurred, particularly with the foreign airlines. But that has all been sorted out now. Naira is highly convertible now. Thank you.
What is interesting, you mentioned how difficult it is to get a banking license in South Africa. The Commonwealth Bank of Australia got a license last year. And there have been, I think, 2 other banking licenses granted. So it's a question really of, I suppose, going through the process. I think it's an 18-month process.
How many months?
About 18-month process. 18, 18. And exchange controls, I think, you know, that's an issue that bedevils many private sector businesses. But I think we're both having elections next year. I'd like to just look at the Nigerian election. I mean, well, what are your predictions? Take out your crystal ball. I mean, what are the issues going to be? Is the president going to run again? What are the issues that should investors be concerned with changes of policy? What are the interesting issues?
Well, I have a microphone, so sorry to that. Well, actually, it was a discussion. We had quite a lot of a discussion about it this morning at the event at Gibbs, and I think one of the concerns raised by Standard Bank is the currency is likely to be affected. Politics in Nigeria is a winner-takes-all game. The stakes are very high. I know that is similar across Africa, but in Nigeria it's particularly so. And I think I'll let Osayaba talk about the political dynamic, because it seems really uncertain from where I'm sitting about which party will win. And as everywhere, it could change everything, or it could change a lot, because things are not institutionalized. The reform process is certainly underway in improving the business climate, but it's not, I wouldn't say it's entrenched. And I think another issue in Nigeria, Nigeria is a federal arrangement of 36 states, and each of these states is nominally quite independent and so on. And many of the governors have served their 2 terms. So in a lot of, I don't know, is Lagos one of them? No. That's the biggest commercial centre by far, but a lot of them will be leaving at the end of their 2nd term. So there's a lot of political potential instability ahead. And I think the current ruling party is in grave danger of being overthrown because of the president's performance over the last few years, President Buhari. But I don't know which party you belong to, but I'll just...
Don't worry, it's Chatham House rules.
Yeah, for now, I don't belong to any party.
Very well.
Yes, but to answer the question properly, the PDP, the main opposition party, was in government for about 20 years and was discredited. The sitting president lost an election, President Jonathan Goodluck. So his party is currently very unpopular. a good number of his governors, his ministers are being tried for corruption cases. So I honestly don't see the PDP as an effective opposition party for now. Two, the leading party, the main party now is the APC. And next year will just be 4 years that they have been in power. For a long time, the president was indisposed, but he's been back on his 2 feet for the past 3 months or 6 months, although he's over 70. I think he's making his views known, unlike before when nobody knew what was going on. It was like the country was being run by the vice president. So I think the APC, the APC should win the election. But the question is, will the president run or not? I don't know whether he would run, but if he decides to step down and allow somebody else in the party to run, that person and the party should win. In a state like Lagos, the biggest state, the commercial nerve center of the country, the governor there is doing an excellent job. So they are likely to win. Lagos controls about 40% of the commercial activities of the country, about 40. So I think the APC would win. Even if the president runs again, in view of the fact that you don't have any effective opposition party or opposition leader, I believe his party will still win. And I don't really see any high level of uncertainties about what will happen. We had a lot of uncertainties because a party that had been in power for about 20 years was lost the elections. A new party came in and it took them a long time to settle in. So we are not likely to have that. More money will be spent towards the election period. The current budget is higher than the budget for last year. The reform process is ongoing. Ease of doing business in Nigeria is good. The World Bank, our rating on the World Bank scale increased, I think, by about 25 points. We're about the 10th best nation in the world in terms of the reform processes. So we have a lot of positive things going on for Nigeria, and I would say that in view of the fact that the APC is the leading party, the party is likely to win the next elections, with or without the president. If he steps down, he has many capable governors or members of the Senate that can replace him. Thank you.
But if the opposition wins, are there real differences in policy? If the opposition wins the election, is there something investors should be worried about? In South Africa, God forbid, if the Red Berets win, there'll be some serious changes.
Yes. If the opposition should win, there are certain policies that are popular and some that are not popular. If the opposition if the opposition will not win the election with unpopular policies, it will not. So I believe even if they were to come in, they would try to improve on the existing policies. And most of these policies are, ease of doing business, new laws that we need to introduce to make Nigeria more competitive. We have a new competition law now in Nigeria. For a long time, we didn't have one. So there are new laws being propagated, being passed on a regular basis to make sure we stand on the same footing as other countries that are doing very well. So it's not just Nigeria. We want other people to see us as Nigeria as a good country to work in and to live in. Thank you.
It seems that investors don't really have too much to worry about, even if there's a change of government.
I don't think they have anything to worry about. The good investors, even when we had the likes of Sani Abacha, who was a military dictator, they came in, they invested, and they made their money. Nigeria is not good for the lily-livered person. Someone who wants quick returns. As I mentioned in the other session, if you have a long-term view, to invest in Nigeria, you will make your money. It's not, we don't have all the things we need in Nigeria, but with proper guidance, and advice, you'll be able to know where to invest in, what to expect, and when you have problems, you have people that can advise you, if only you seek their advice.
I don't think investors have a lot to worry about. I think the instability possibly around the election is more of a worry than the outcome. Because I think Nigeria is kind of past the point of no return, but in a good way. I think it's modernizing quite quickly. And also a lot of investors in Nigeria, a lot of companies have been in Nigeria for more than 100 years. That's a long-term investment, and they're still there and making a lot of money. And I'm talking more about the European multinationals, for example. I'm not talking about oil companies. So I think that absolutely, I think that the hot money is often a good bet, but I think it really is the long-term game, and I think a lot of South Africans are finally seeing it that way. It's taken a while. I think a lot of people just want to sell things to Nigeria, but I think those days are going to end fairly soon. I think the government will start cracking down on local content issues and using visas and work permits and things to try and push greater investment rather than trading, certainly from a key trading partner like South Africa, or investment or political partner, whichever.
I mean, what about Boko Haram? We just had the horrible terrorist attack in Ouagadougou. In Lex Africa, we were going to go for our annual general meeting in Burkina Faso, which unfortunately now we've had to relocate due to security concerns. I mean, every now and then the media shows Boko Haram, another Boko Haram attack. I mean, it is confined to the north, I understand that, but is there no solution in sight?
Well, I think that, I think the first thing is to mention that the Boko Haram country, if you like, is very far away from the sort of commercial hubs of the southeastern, Abuja and so on, southwest. So I think that the president hasn't gone nearly as far as he had hoped to when he started this term in terms of stamping out Boko Haram. They've clearly got strong backers. They seem to have bounced back in the last couple of weeks. But there's other security kind of flashpoints in Nigeria, but I don't think any of them really affect investors. I think crime would, if there's going to be an issue, we have plenty of it, we know a lot about crime here. It's just a bit different sometimes, kidnapping and the odd thing like that in Nigeria. So rather than, I think, Boko Haram, I think it's just generally, it's like any other country in that regard. But
as President Obasanjo once said, he said, Boko Haram has a political flavor, which means you have some politicians that are backing Boko Haram. As a matter of fact, some years ago, some members of Boko Haram were arrested in the governor's lodge, residence of a governor in the northeast. So they have some politicians that are backing them. Because we have an election next year, some students in a secondary school were kidnapped about 3-4 weeks ago. Just the same way the first set of students were kidnapped. So anytime any group would want to score a political point, they use criminals and terrorists to shake the government up. Some months ago, the government said they had dealt completely with Boko Haram, and they were just cleaning up what was left. But a problem, this is a very important, anytime the government gets involved in the release of the abducted Chibok girls. I don't know whether they pay cash for it. I don't know, and I'm not saying so. But you will find out that the Boko Haram gets stronger. They start bombing offices or kidnapping people again. But as you both rightly said, Boko Haram is restricted to the northeast, which is almost maybe 1 hour, 30 minutes flying time. So it's just restricted to one part of the country. People need to worry more, maybe criminals or kidnappers. But in the main cities like Lagos, Abuja, Port Harcourt, those things, really, I mean, even if they occur, I mean, at a very low level. So if you want to come to Nigeria, you'll never see a Boko Haram fighter, please.
I know we're running out of time. Does anyone have any questions for the panel? Issues to raise? If not, hold you back. We're going to have a short tea break. But please come back. We're going to discuss Zimbabwe, which I think is already a great hot topic. And then Zambia, Mozambique, regional integration and regional issues. Thank you. Please thank the panel.